Hey, welcome. We're back to another great episode of the Wealth and Freedom Nexus podcast. As always, I'm your host, John Rickard. A few little housekeeping things. Be sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode, whether that's Spotify or iTunes or iHeartRadio or whatever you prefer. Also, if you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button as well as the little bell icon so you never miss a new video that comes out, not only of these podcasts, but of my YouTube show, hashtag Screw the W2, as well as various videos I'll be dropping throughout 2023. Everything from, Financial Freedom Friday tips to, deep dives into investing tidbits or covered calls for stocks. I've got quite a few topics queued up here for the rest of the year. So again, for all my, at this recording, 1,180 YouTube subscribers, I just want to say thank you for your patronage and thank you for sharing and listening and rating, thumbs up, etc. on all the videos. That definitely helps with Google's algorithm so that more and more people can be introduced to the show, as well as introduced to all the financial education that I bring with this platform. Now, in this episode, we mentioned a lot of things from tax savings from being a real estate professional, for instance, which you can get a deep dive into that on what exactly is a real estate professional back with Brandon Hall in episode 30. We also talked a little bit about cost segregation with my friend Yona Weiss, a little bit more in detail on episode 12, as well as the changes that occurred here in 2023. That is episode 64. Also briefly mentioned about conventional versus non-conventional loans. You can learn a little bit more about those with episodes 20 and 22 with Ridge Lending's Chaley Ridge. And we also briefly talked about construction loans, which is the first time we've done don't want to say a deep dive, but a little bit more discussion on what a construction loan is, what's all required with a construction loan, because there are a few nuances with it that if you never have done one, there are a little bit different than a traditional mortgage or even a HELOC or a home equity line of credit. So with that, my guest is Steve Olson with FIG, which stands for Fourplex Investor Group. Now, as you can probably tell, they only build and manage fourplexes, which is basically one building that has four individual units. Some blogs call this quadplexes. I've heard them called fourplexes more often than not. And actually, going back, for those that aren't familiar with my story, my first investment was a fourplex. That was actually my very first real estate investment going back to 2016 here in Marshall, Minnesota. A lot of people start with a single family home, work their way up. My wife and I, just the way the cards fell, we did a reverse. We bought a fourplex and then got, single family duplexes after that. One thing I wanted to kind of highlight, it's been mentioned on a number of podcasts and blogs, Bigger Pockets, etc. But fourplexes really are kind of the best of both worlds for, residential properties, especially for investments, and getting the benefits of multifamily. Now, high level for Fannie, Freddie conforming loans, whenever you hear residential property or residential investment, technically that is considered anything from 1 to 4 units. So those golden tickets that Chaley Ridge always talks about for, you can have up to 10 in your name, possibly even 10 in your spouse's name if you qualify, that give you the best fixed rate terms out there, as well as fixed for up to 30 years, which is kind of a specialty we have in the United States. So not every country has that. It's usually, 30-year amortized, but there's a balloon payment, or I think in Canada, every 5 to 10 years, it automatically resets to whatever the interest rate is prevailing at the time. So if you're like me and many others that refinanced, whether a cash out refinance or a brand new purchase back in 2020, 2021, even a little early in the 2022, locked in those, myself personally, 2.3 to 4.5% interest rates. Now with inflation bearing its ugly head, calming down a little bit, but interest rates, as I'm recording this now, are getting around 6.5% for conventional mortgages. Have seen some starting in the 5. But regardless, if you have a fixed interest loan 30-year fix that's locked in, lower than the rate of inflation, heck, even under 5%, you're doing pretty well. Now, like I was mentioning before, in the residential space, anything 1 to 4 units is considered residential as far as Freddie and Fannie are concerned. Anything 5 units or above is considered commercial. Now, while there are lending institutes out there that are doing more 30-year fixed loans for commercials, they are still kind of the rarity. They're not so much the norm. Typically, you're going to see 15, 20, 25-year amortized loans. Interest rates are going to be a little higher. Typically, there might be a balloon payment or a rate reset during that period. It's not locked in for 30 years. And regardless, typically isn't going to be the lower interest rates that you see with your traditional Freddie and Fannie loans. Now, why fourplexes are kind of the best of both worlds? Well, if you're getting a single family home, again, Shelley Ridge just talked about this back in episodes 20 and 22, where you have 10 golden tickets. If you're married, finally, jointly, and qualify, you can get up to 20 golden tickets. That basically gets you the best subsidized rates for mortgages that are locked in for a full 30 years. So right now we've talked about 10, possibly 20 if you qualify. And there are many investors out there that get 20 golden tickets, so to speak, on 20 individual properties, maybe a single family home through Mid-South Homebuyers, Spartan Invest, Freedom Group in Ohio, just to name a few that I've had on this show. But since the 1 to 4 units Freddie and Fannie considered residential, in theory, if you bought a fourplex, and granted, that's the highest you can get as a residential loan, that counts as 1 ticket. Now you can do the math. If you qualify up to 20 golden tickets, you're married filing jointly, and instead of buying single family homes, maybe you go all the way up to fourplexes. That technically could get you up to 80 doors that are all on low fixed rate interest mortgages locked in for 30 years. So that's kind of the inflation triple crown that Keith Weinhold always talks about when you have long fixed rate loans on cash flowing real estate. Now, like you've probably seen with the apartment complexes, maybe you've seen syndications or gotten hit up by syndicators, invest whatever, 10, 50, $100,000 into a syndication. Typically, a lot of times those are, for 100, 200 units, whatnot. Now, the benefits of multifamily is that you have one roof that goes over multiple properties. So it's one roof to fix versus multiple. There's lower construction costs because you have one exterior shell, if you will, but you have many units in there versus 4 walls on this property, 4 walls on this property, 4 walls on this property, etc. So typically the cost per unit is lower in multifamily. There's a lot of fees and shared costs. Like I said, the roof is just one of many. And many times the vacancy is not as critical. If you have a multifamily, let's just say 10 units, and you have 2 units that are vacant, well, you still have 8 units in that 10plex that's bringing in income that hopefully should still be covering all your fixed monthly bills and maybe some variable bills as well. If you have a single family residence, you're either 100% occupied or 100% vacant. There's really no in between there, unless maybe the renter just starts paying half payments or whatever the case may be. Some cons, if you will, single family homes, which is probably why they have skyrocketed in value and seen double-digit returns over the last 3 years, is you have more exit strategies with a single family home. For instance, my property that I have with Mid-South in Memphis, I get hit up at least 2 times a week from wholesalers or realtors if I want to sell my property. And it's like, no, I have no desire to sell it right now. But with a single family home, you can sell it to an investor, you can sell it to a first-time home buyer, you can sell it to a retired couple that maybe wants to downsize. There's quite a few options available. Whereas with multifamily, again, whether it's fourplex or a 200 unit apartment, typically that you're going to be reserved for investors or maybe a syndication or a REIT for exit strategies of those. So a little bit more, few more ways to exit out of a single family home versus a multifamily. Again, these are just some of the few pros and cons. I've really liked the fourplex, and I wish I knew about this when I bought my first home, but again, back to the residential piece, you technically can get FHA loan, VA loan, USDA rural development, and anywhere from a 0 to 5% down payment. You can live in one unit and rent out the other 2 units, 3 units, 1 unit if it's a duplex, for instance. So there's a lot of flexibility with fourplexes that you can't get, as a primary home, for instance, as a primary or as an investment property. So, with the conventional financing, subsidized rates, you get that being a residential, but you get some of the more efficiencies and economies of scale as a multifamily. And this is why fourplexes, we talked about in this interview, but they built a ton up through the 70s, little in the 80s, whatever reason they just stopped, and hasn't really picked up for the last 5-10 years. So this Fourplex Investor Group has really marketed that and kind of taken on hold and really realize those efficiencies both from a building perspective as well as from an investor perspective, and concentrate only on fourplexes. So, like I said, my first investment was a fourplex. I've worked with a lot of first-time home buyers to at least entertain the option, whether they qualify for VA, FHA, USDA. Great way to start building wealth and essentially live rent-free is buy a multifamily, duplex, triplex, fourplex, live in one unit, rent out the others. Stay in it for usually about 12 months is the seasoning requirement for FHA. VA, I think, has a few other rules, but technically, once you've been there for 12 months, then you can move out. Maybe you want to move into your own home then. Now you can rent out that last unit that you used to live in. Sometimes that might require a refinance into a conventional loan versus a FHA or VA. There's a couple other financing strategies you can do with that. But really, if you want to start early and grow your wealth and get the best of both worlds between multifamily and single family homes, fourplexes or duplexes and triplexes really are the best of both worlds. And the fourplex is where that caps off at. Like I said, anything above that 5 units or above then has to go only conventional. There is no residential mortgages available. There's the hard stop at the 4 units. So with that, we will begin today's interview with today's guest, Steve at Fourplex Investor Group, after a word from our sponsors. For investors seeking DSCR financing, check out timothyhero.com. The guy has closed over 150 DSCR loans in the last 2 years and has been appearing on podcasts and written about by journalists. He's well connected with some of the best lenders in the game and can get you the financing for your rental properties. You've worked hard for your money. You're likely working harder than ever. Your money should be doing the same. Most high net worth individuals have incredible focus for their trained profession, but they are not trained investors. Without the right investing education, uncertainty and risk increase, sidelining most highly paid professionals. And yes, stocks and 401ks are the sidelines. Step into the arena with real estate investing. You can get educated and follow proven real estate business models with Flip and Danny Lynn Robison. Their book, Get Real, Understand Real Estate Before It's Too Late, will lead you toward passive income and financial freedom. Generate significant income in the short term and build long-term wealth at the same time. Read Get Real by Flip and Danny Lynn Robison. Get the book for free by texting GET to 66866. Again, that is text GET to 66866.
Are you tired of trying to keep ahead in the rat race, only to have so much of your hard-earned money going to the tax collector? Equity doesn't pay the bills. Retirement savings don't pay you now, and there are only 24 hours in a day to work. The only solution is passive income that pays you 24/7 now, not 40 years from now. From vetted investment opportunities to tax saving strategies, let John guide you through all the confusion and take control of your financial life in pursuit of financial freedom. So sit back, relax, and welcome to the Wealth and Freedom Nexus.
Are you sick and tired of your day job? Do you think that there might be more to life than to live and die by the 9 to 5? If so, you are not alone. I left my safe and secure job in 2019, and since then I have met many entrepreneurs that have done the same thing. If you've enjoyed the Wealth and Freedom Nexus podcast for the educational news, tune into my YouTube channel for the inspirational stories on how you can say, screw the W-2. Go to youtube.com/W Freedom Nexus and look for the Screw the W-2 playlist. New episodes drop every Saturday, and later this year will be released on all popular podcast platforms. As always, this is John Rickard, investor, educator, realtor, helping you find your way to wealth and freedom. Hey, Steve, thanks for coming on the show and being able to reschedule.
Sure, glad to be here. Thanks for putting up with all the rescheduling. It's crazy times.
Exactly. I'm just as guilty. I remember a year ago when I was booking podcasts, my son was, 5 months at the time. And then, of course, COVID and daycare and sick and strep and hand, foot, and mouth and flu. And there's some other stuff I'm forgetting in there, too. So I had to reschedule a lot.
Well, there's never any shortage of excuses in life, but it's just they come and go with legitimacy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sometimes you're like, oh, that's a real one. Other times, no, that's
yeah. It's like, oh, let's see. He's got 4 things. He's got 103-degree temp. We were in urgent care. Yeah, that's probably a little bit more,
sometimes is legitimate. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, now as we jump in, and for my listeners that maybe aren't familiar with you and familiar with FIG, maybe you could just kind of give us a brief background on yourself as well as FIG.us.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do it. FIG is the Fourplex Investment Group for short. We build and develop and manage master plan fourplex communities in 4 different states. And really the secret sauce to that is, I jokingly call it the armchair value add.
Okay.
Where an investor who's done the research, likes the market, likes the area, is willing to take on a construction loan, and our team builds their fourplex within one of our master plan communities.
Okay.
And that basically allows them to get that equity through being the one that says, I'm willing to take the risk of going through the build, going through the lease up, and therefore I get a better price, right?
Gotcha.
So armchair value add, if you can do DocuSign from your armchair, you can do one of those deals. So it's been great. We've developed just over 4,000 doors. We focused mostly in Utah, Arizona, Idaho, and Texas.
Okay.
And just having been through this whole process many times, it started to take me into a bit of a consulting and partnership role in some other states too, with people that want to use the model, because it sounds like it's ours, but it's not. It's just we're getting construction loans to build fourplexes.
Sure.
We just do it in a very organized and systematic way. So anybody can do what I'm talking about here today. Many people choose to come to us and say, you just do it. So it's been great, and allowed me to really learn a lot about the multifamily business in kind of a backwards way, but led me into being a general partner on some new construction projects. Right now, I've got 150 doors under construction.
Oh, wow.
And it's been a crazy journey. And real estate, especially the development side and the leasing side, you get a nice thick skin.
Yep. I think you got to have for any business, but definitely real estate.
Yeah. If you're not used to things not going exactly according to plan all the time, you should buy treasury bills.
Yeah, exactly.
This one's not for you. Yeah.
So, now you brought up an interesting point, and kind of gonna maybe throw a curveball, so to speak. But on my podcast before, I've talked about, qualifying mortgages, non-qualifying mortgages, the standard 30-year fixed. You mentioned, just the construction loan. And for maybe, people out there listening, wondering what's construction loan. I've never, been involved with a construction process. I've just bought a turnkey or bought a house. Can you give us a brief overview of what a construction loan is versus, your standard 30-year loan?
Totally, yeah. Curveball, but it's one of those big hanging curveballs, and I'm going to hit it. Okay,
All right.
because we have had that conversation before. Yeah, you're talking about conforming loans versus construction loans, right? Conforming is a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loan that typically is purchased by them
Hmm.
at some point along, or it's at least originated exactly according to their parameters, even if it's not eventually purchased by them. So there are
Okay.
guidelines. And you know what? For the long-term ownership of real estate as a landlord, I think it's by far and away the best way
Hmm.
to own a property, right? It's because you hear about right now what's happening with these crazy interest rates
Yeah.
on multifamily. You don't want to have this be the time where you've got a floating rate. Now,
Right.
construction loans can and do have floating rates, but when you're locked in on that true 30-year fixed, I mean, as long as you can make the payment, you can just hunker down and deal with whatever's going on.
Hmm.
So what happens, the difference in these is a construction loan. Some might call it a commercial loan because it's just made by the bank for commercial purposes. It doesn't conform to the Dodd-Frank stuff and the Fannie Mae stuff.
Okay.
So they you'll say, I want to build a fourplex, and here's my land costs, here's my budget, here's my plans, here's my builder.
Okay.
And they'll order an appraisal. They're going to typically require you to come in with 25% down, at
Okay.
least on these loans that we're doing. And the
Okay.
reason they're okay with that right now is because the preferred lender we use at FIG sends your loan package to the bank with a pre-approval conventional conforming loan.
Oh, okay.
So the local bank knows, okay, we're getting taken out by a Fannie Mae conforming loan when this thing is done. And this person qualifies for that based on a 25% down payment, and they have
Hmm.
the credit and the right debt to income ratios, all that stuff that you're used to on a
Okay.
conforming loan. Okay.
Okay.
So they then approve the construction loan for a 25% down. And typically these construction loans are a duration of 1 year to 18 months, and they are a floating rate interest only loan.
Okay.
And so when you close on a lot with FIG, you've got that construction loan in place. You've got a prepaid interest reserve account. They require that you fund one
Okay.
year's worth of interest in advance. And so
Okay.
what happens is the builder goes through and draws from that construction loan, they automatically just debit out of your account the
Hmm.
interest payment for that month based on where the rate is.
Okay.
And, you know, hey, I think it's always great on podcasts and in general to just put everything on the table. That's been a little pinch point for us lately.
Hmm.
You know, when you've got investors who closed on a construction loan a year ago, maybe
Right.
we're running late because of COVID supply. Now
Hmm.
that loan is almost fully drawn by the builder, and it's adjusted upward on the rate
Yeah.
like crazy, right? That's tough. And
Hmm.
we've learned a lot about watching out for that kind of stuff lately.
Yeah, makes sense. Now you kind of alluded to this, and the time we're recording this, and by the time this will drop, will be about 3 years, maybe just a hair over, post pandemic, hopefully with COVID
Yeah.
19. But obviously, take us back to March of 2020. How did or what all happened in your industry when COVID hit from supply chains, timelines, etc.
Well, I'm still going through therapy for that. I
Okay.
mean, you might get some twitching as I tell you about it, but I do remember my wife and I were on our way back from vacation in Bora Bora of all places, and we
Okay.
landed in Los Angeles for our layover in early March. I think it was March 8th, 2020. Couple days later, boom, shut down, right?
Yeah.
And the next couple of months were just, it was just purely irrational.
Hmm.
We had, a few hundred doors queued up to start construction, and we're getting investors ready to start closing on their construction loans.
Okay.
And this went from a well-oiled machine to say I was herding cats overnight would be generous. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, couple calls a day with investors. I gotta cancel. I can't do
Yeah,
this.
I've
And
lost my job. What
yeah,
government said I got
yeah,
to stay home for 3 months or whatever.
Totally. Especially, we had a lot going on in Houston, and a lot of the petroleum guys,
Mm.
mid-level execs at oil companies. I mean, you remember for a while there, I think 2 days, oil futures were negative. If you
Yeah,
had a
negative
barge,
$37 a barrel.
yeah, you had to pay to get rid of your oil, right? So it was tough, and there were a handful of investors that, and I'm talking about roughly a 2-month period, that stayed cool.
Okay.
And I admire them for that. They stayed in our projects with us. We recommitted a lot of those units. And actually, the only time we've ever lowered our prices was this time,
Okay.
because the market just was not rational.
Yep.
And we had some money coming due. We had to move forward on some stuff. So we said, you know what? I remember we had a handful of fourplexes that we had been selling at 720,000. Those were the days.
Okay.
And we just couldn't get anybody to talk to us. I
Hmm.
mean, investors, they were just in an I'm on hold
Yep.
pattern. And so we said, okay, we have to see if we can get this price so low to where people are willing to think.
Yeah.
And I remember we tanked those to 620. We were going to lose money, but we were going to get some
Wow.
debt paid down. And then, yeah, that got people to start thinking. And then we hit May of 2020, and everybody lost their minds completely in the other
Yep.
direction, times 1,000.
Yep.
People calling, yelling, "Hey, I wanted one of those fourplex." I said, "Where were you in March, pal? I couldn't get you to
Yep.
pick up the phone." And so this got really, really crazy. There were some impacts on the property management side, but
Okay.
overall, with government assistance and other kinds of assistance, I don't really remember a notable spike in vacancies or eviction problems. We weathered that pretty well in the markets
Okay.
that we were in. But I will tell you, once we started to hit late 2020, this availability of labor, supply chains, logistics was just a complete nightmare.
Hmm.
I mean, cabinets stuck on barges in Long Beach Harbor for months, can't get
Yep.
unloaded. Now we can't get LVT flooring. Next you hear it's appliances forever. It was
Yep.
appliances.
I heard that from
You
numerous
know,
builders.
oh yeah, yeah. Couldn't get them fixed. Couldn't get new ones. The lumber, the shortage of OSB, and it's still kind of going. Now the
Hmm.
labor has lightened up significantly
Okay.
with the spike of interest rates in the middle of last year. The markets we're in were really COVID fevery, no pun intended, markets.
Yep.
Boise, Salt Lake, Phoenix, places where once people realized that the world wasn't ending, developers just piled in,
Yep.
right? And subcontract, hey, I need some tile work done, and they'll say that'll be $1 million. I can start in 5 years.
Oh, jeez.
It just, I'm exaggerating, but it was
Right.
crazy. So I'll take Boise, Idaho as an example. Back in the fall, the biggest builder up there just stopped construction. And
Really?
that led to others stopping. Now we see the population trends, and we see this as a short to medium term problem.
Mhm.
We're continuing forward with our construction, but projects that we had been stalled on, couldn't get done, now they're crawling with subs, and
Okay.
we're getting a lot of work done. A lot more subs are available. But really, what's got us pulling our hair out right now is the lack of availability for panels, master
Oh.
electrical panels. I've heard all kinds of reasons, from they make aluminum in Ukraine, and so they're not getting enough
Mm.
aluminum to make these, to we just weren't ready. I mean, I don't know. The point is, you know, we're not the only builder developer, but there are others that have buildings that are done, and
Right.
they can't get certificate of occupancy because you can't get it without power,
Right.
and you can't get power without that master
Yeah.
panel. So they're trickling in, but it's a headache.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
sure that's, a little bit more frustrating where, hey, we don't have a fridge in yet, but otherwise it's ready. It's like, we'll bring one from our
Hmm.
old house. My parents have one in the basement we can borrow until then, but it's not like you can just, oh, I happen to have 10 electrical panels just in my garage. Here, you can have one.
Yeah. Yeah. Another issue we noticed was just overall incompetent city officials. And I don't care if they're listening. We've not been on good terms for quite some time, so this isn't changing anything. But
Sure.
the city of Phoenix, Arizona, what a complete nightmare in approvals. I'll specifically call out Meridian, Idaho, and especially Nampa, Idaho.
Okay.
I mean, just a lot of turnover in these inspection departments and in these approval departments because imagine you're a building inspector working for a city making 50 grand a year. Now all of a sudden local Bob the Builder's hiring, he'll pay 150 base and bonuses. You're out of
Yeah,
there. You don't last more than a couple of weeks. And
exactly.
and so you get these guys showing up to do your four-way inspections or whatever, and the new guy decides he's going to interpret code totally different
Mhm.
than the old guy. It's a moving target.
So
I
you're
mean,
almost starting over basically at that point.
it oh yeah, that's been really rough. But you know what? Hey, John, if it was easy, everybody would do it.
Exactly. So now, Steve, you bring up a interesting point. I'll kind of, shift a little bit here with, incompetent, city officials, but maybe kind of want to just take this a little bit step farther, being that you concentrate on fourplexes versus, single family. I'll share one story here, a little Marshall, Minnesota, that any new build fourplexes has to have a fire suppression system put in it.
Oh
That's their
yeah.
cutoff. And to give you an idea, so my first investment, like I alluded to in the intro, was a fourplex here in Marshall. Last year, right next door was a triplex up for sale, which still sold for ungodly amount of money. I still don't know what the buyers were thinking. It's like good luck getting a
Yeah.
cash flowing. But
Yeah.
regardless, so I actually looked at it with a friend. Both of us are investors. You were both kind of thinking about it. We tossed out briefly maybe a partnership, but it was an owner occupant that he rented out the other 2 units. So he lived in the largest unit, and it was basically like an up and down split level. And we were
Yeah.
looking at it, it's like, there's already plumbing downstairs. There's a little bar area. It wouldn't take a lot to put a kitchen down here, like a fully functional kitchen. And then where the stairways are, some drywall, paint, separate doors, and turned into a fourplex. And we're kind of looking at, it's like, well, maybe probably $10,000. I'm kind of thinking off the top of my head. And we brought that up to the inspector, and it was a flat stop. The fact that we are remodeling, there would be no grandfathering in that. Nope, if you're converting it to fourplex, you'd have to put a fire suppression system in. Well, quick Google search, that was $20,000 to $30,000. I'm like,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
instead of spending $10,000, now we're looking at 40. And there went the numbers. It's like, this is just ridiculous. Not to say that every area is as ridiculous as what we had to put up with. Are there certain, shall we say, regulations or laws or stipulations that an investor needs to be aware of when purchasing a fourplex in the markets you are in versus a single family home?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I hate
Okay.
fire suppression. Drives me crazy. Right. For example, in Texas, if we have like a little alarm go off in our fire suppression system in a 200 unit development, and an alarm could be there's one little code error or something.
Okay.
By law, you have to have what's called fire watch. You're paying somebody X amount of dollars per hour to sit there and make sure and point around and go, well, there's no fires,
How do I
right?
get that job?
And
That sounds pretty
oh
lucrative.
gosh, it's just the worst. And they're high maintenance, and I personally, I don't know. There's some fire marshal listening right now. I'm giving him a heart attack, but I don't think they do anything. Like there's one small little incident in a unit, the whole building turns on, right? And you
Yeah.
ruin a bunch of stuff. You're like, it's just ruining the building in a different way.
Yeah.
That's what a fire suppression system is. And so it really, in a lot of places, it's like you say, the type of construction or the density in shared walls
Hmm.
dictates locally if you have to do suppression or
Okay.
not. And we're working on one in Texas specifically, and we're going to actually build freestanding duplexes.
Okay.
One of the main reasons is because we don't have to do fire suppression
Mm.
because they're high maintenance. You got to get the annual inspection. They cost
Yeah.
a bunch of money. And in addition, one thing we learned at stupid school and we went for a while on this one before we graduated. And there's a lot of discussion internally about how we went wrong here. Is when you do fire suppression, the type of wall between the units that you have to do, it goes, I mean, almost down to a 2x6 or to a 2x4 with only one piece of drywall on each side. And
Hmm.
a builder making that decision in a vacuum is going to say, that's great. That's really cheap. We can
Mm-hmm.
build these plans and we're fully compliant. But fast forward 3 years, you can hear
Yeah.
everything. And I mean everything. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's a there's a family show, but
Yeah.
it's a problem, and it really deteriorates the long-term value, your rents, your vacancy. You feel that. So
Yeah.
just because something is up to code doesn't mean it's up to standard.
Mm.
And so since then we've said, well, we don't care. And sometimes they actually don't let you do what's called a shaft liner wall. They say, well, it's sprinkled, you can't. So we actually just try to avoid it like the plague unless it's a really good home run deal. But we look really a lot now at those types of walls between the units. You break the floor plate, you have a shaft liner, right? You got two sets of studs. Right there, you barely even know people are next to you,
Right.
right? It's more expensive, but wow, does it pay off in terms of how happy your tenants are
Yeah.
and what they now can't hear. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something to really keep in mind. You have to understand what you're going to have to do between your units. And
Okay.
it's just get with your engineer
Okay.
locally. They'll be able to look into the local code and figure out what's going to get approved.
Okay. Sounds good. Now, like you said, Steve, and this is obviously a moving target. And 3 years ago, someone could buy a fourplex and have 6 figures of equity, and then a year or two later, oh, it's listed for 720. Here, I'll give you $1 million because I don't want to lose out on it. But as hopefully the market's getting a little bit more rational, if say one of my listeners today, you know I'll let you pick the market, but someone wants to buy a fourplex very simply from start to finish. What are they looking at for, total amount in, timeline, and then eventual lease up? Like what kind of leases
Yeah.
each unit could get?
Well, hypothetically, we've got a batch of fourplexes we're going to release for reservation here in the next couple of weeks in
Okay.
Ogden, Utah.
Okay.
And these are a stacked style fourplex. So imagine that you're looking at a 16 unit apartment building that's 4 stories,
Okay.
right? Down the middle is your breezeway with your stairs that go up and internally access the units, right? So
Okay.
on each floor, you've got 4 2-bedroom units.
Okay.
Second floor, you have the same, third the same. So the way we platted those on their individual tax IDs is that each corner of the building, floors 1 through 4,
Okay.
is its own tax ID, its own fourplex.
Oh,
And
interesting.
that stairwell between the two is HOA common area. They
Mm,
maintain and insure that area. So
okay.
that's the style I'm talking about right now. I
Okay.
think those are going to sell for probably around 925 to 950
Okay.
would be my current guess. And so an investor, hypothetically, they need to have 25% down, and they're going to need a year's worth of interest reserves and closing costs.
Okay.
So, if this is live and in person, let's go 950
Until the Fed
times
changes
point.
rates again, but
Bingo. Yeah. And I would think you're going to need, so 237.5 is the down payment, right?
okay.
I think you're going to need like 65 grand on top of that.
Okay.
You got loan origination, closing costs, all that stuff. But most of that 65 is that prepaid interest reserve.
Gotcha.
Okay. So you would hypothetically, you reserve that thing in like March or April of 23. It starts coming out of the ground this summer and it's done next summer.
Okay.
And we always encourage people to keep, 4-ish months of operational reserves on hand for when that does turn over. What if we're having a tough time leasing, there's something funky going on in the market, and you're just taking a little longer. It's nice to have that capital already set aside. And
Mhm.
additionally, that gives you a true measurement on your return. because you know how much capital you really did need to get to stabilization. So
Sure.
I don't know, does that answer your question?
No, yeah, that does. So, I mean, yeah, I'm even kind of rounding here. If depending on when people listen to this, real estate, if you're looking at $1 million or 250,000 per unit, brand new fourplex build, factor in roughly 30% closing cost, down payment, prepaid interest, maybe 300,000. So just out of curiosity, because I've had a number of custodians of self-directed retirement accounts. Have you had people invest in these with their retirement accounts, or does the construction loan kind of throw it out the window at that point?
Yeah, it kind of throws it out
Okay.
because, as I understand it, those IRA loans have to be non-recourse.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Unless you're paying all
we've not
cash, maybe
found a
that's an
bank that'll
option.
do a construction. Well, that's my second point. Yeah, we've not found a construction lender that will go non-recourse on a
Okay.
construction loan.
Okay.
They perceive it to be too risky. I've had investors buy them all cash,
Okay.
and you could buy all cash, right? Essentially be your own construction lender. And
Okay.
then when it's done, I believe you could refinance.
Oh, the cash out
You go
refi.
to, North American Savings Bank or whoever one of those popular IRA lenders is. When you have a completed fourplex all cash in your IRA, yeah, they would do a loan on that.
Okay.
They told me. I've not had anyone actually do the refi yet. I think it would be a great idea, but
Right.
we'll see.
All right. Well, for anyone out there listening, Specialized Trust, Quest, IRA Financial, all the other ones I mentioned, feel free to be Steve's guinea pig to see if this works out in real life.
Yep, we're looking for guinea pigs. Yeah.
All right. So, well, so we're closing this out, Steven. I wanted to kind of circle back. So I had this at the beginning of my question list, and then obviously a couple curveballs later. But you mentioned obviously you have different building requirements, fire suppressions, different codes, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe high level, why did you and your company decide to concentrate on fourplexes versus a lot of communities are doing single family homes or doing like a 200 unit apartment complex?
Yeah. Well, the beginning of FIG 2010, 2011-ish, right?
Mhm.
I wasn't there yet, right?
Okay.
I came in 2 to 3 years after that.
Okay.
But our principles, the thought was, if you recall in 2010, if you were buying land, people wanted to have you committed. You were insane,
Sure.
right? Nobody was buying land. People were just barely waking up to buying all the foreclosed bank real estate
Yep.
at that point, right? But the thought was, well, there's a lot of cash out there. What does it want? What's a safe place for investors to go? And because of that true 30-year fixed rate loan that you can use to own a fourplex with, that was the rationale of, hey, look, I can only get 10 conventional loans in my own name.
Right.
And I think back then they had reduced it to a 4 for a period of
Yeah,
time.
4, then
Um,
6, and that's been 10, I
I
think,
could,
the
in theory,
last
buy
years.
40 doors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I could, in theory, buy 40 doors in my own name with true 30-year fixed rate loans.
Yeah.
No one's coming asking me about coverage ratios, auditing me. It's just make the payment and that's it.
Yep.
And you get that benefit of multifamily diversification.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really the rationale there is, could we provide that? Because they put up a ton of fourplexes in the 70s and 80s, and then they just stopped.
Yep.
And if you were looking for fourplexes for a while there, you couldn't find anything that wasn't more than 30 years old. And so we
Right.
saw a need and
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. And I think there was, I can't remember when and where I learned this, that, as a added little financial, tidbit out there, if you're married filing jointly, everyone's situation is
yeah,
different, but you make 100,000 a year, let's just say, and your spouse makes 100,000 a year, and you can kind of qualify very close as two individual people, you can get 10 golden tickets, as Chaley Ridge always calls them, in your name, and 10 golden tickets in your spouse. They have 20, times it by 4 units. Well, you're looking at 80 units technically as a max that are Freddie, Fannie subsidized loans, 30-year fixed.
that's the holy grail right there.
Yeah.
And you can even, and you've got to talk to your tax advisor about
Yeah.
what I'm about to say, but it gets really fun when one of the spouses can eventually qualify as a real estate professional
Yep.
for tax purposes. And then even more fun when you're doing these new construction and you do a cost segregation
Yep.
study when it's completed, those taxes just start getting knocked way down. And they did reduce that bonus depreciation, I think, to 80% in
Right. For
2023.
2023 here.
I
Yeah.
hope they'll bring that back, because that was such a good way to get new units into a market that in spite of the interest rate problem we have right now, we still need new units in many
Right.
markets across America. And
Yeah.
if you can lower somebody's taxes, they'll bring you the units.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm sure with our mutual circles, you're well aware of Madison Specs and Yona Weiss. I've had him on podcast twice about
Yep.
cost segregation, tax savings, and yeah, new build fourplex. Like you said, go down the rabbit hole of the holy grail of 40 to 80 units, golden tickets, cost segregation, 80% depreciation here in 2020.
Real Estate Pro. Yeah.
Yep.
It's
This is where the evil wealthy get away without paying federal income tax. They're just using the tax law to their advantage.
happy to be evil.
So as we close this out, now I'm thinking of Austin Powers and Dr. Evil now instead of the
Yes.
Fourplex investing. In closing, Steve, if anyone out there listening to this, wants to dive into Fourplex investing, want to learn more about you and FIG, what's the best way to reach out?
You just go to fig.us. That's
Okay.
our website. Tons of videos, information. You can see what we've done, and there are ways to contact us there if you'd like to move the discussion along.
All right, sounds good. And for those listening, I'll have that in the show notes and clickable format. But this is probably my first podcast I've had where the website's so easy you can probably remember it, as that's, let's see, fig.us was that 5 letters basically.
Yeah, you haven't forgotten it yet. You were
Fig.
able to recite it there. That was impressive.
Yeah, so sounds good. Well, thanks again for your time, Steve. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with my listeners, and I hope to have you back on the show at a later time.
Good talking to you.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to share, rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. For more updates, check out www.wealthandfreedomnexus.com. Remember, nothing on this show should be considered tax, legal, investment, or professional advice. This show is produced solely for educational and informational purposes. Please consult an appropriate and licensed tax, legal, real estate, or business professional for specific advice for your situation. For distribution or publication rights or media interviews, please contact the host.